Today is February the 25th, 2020. My name is Tanya Finchum. I'm with Oklahoma State University. And along with me is Larry Caldwell, a retired NRCS engineer. And we are in Oklahoma City. No, we're not. We are in Edmond, Oklahoma to speak with Dr. James Jim Mells. And this is part of our Conservation Heritage Project, which is a collaboration between Oklahoma State University, the Oklahoma Conservation Historical Society, and the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And we are here to learn about Jim's father, Red Mells. God, I'm messing this all up. Red Mells. We will learn in a minute how he got his nickname for Red. He was the Mr. Watershed of the Year. He was the first National Watershed Congress's Watershed Award winner, and we believe that's in the late 1950s, early 60s. We're not quite sure in there. And he helped, or was very involved with the Sandstone Creek drainage system from its inception. So we'll learn a little bit about that later too. But first, we're going to learn a little bit about Jim. Beginning when and where were you born?
I was born at Sayre, although we lived in Cheyenne, but there was no birthing facility at Cheyenne. So Sayre's just down the road to the south.
And what year?
1940, first day of spring.
Okay. And did you have siblings?
Yes, I have a brother, 6 years younger. Bill is his name, William.
Okay. And where did you go to elementary school?
Cheyenne Elementary School.
And high school?
Cheyenne High School.
And graduated when?
1958.
Okay. And then at that point, what were your plans?
Oh, I don't know that I really had plans. I had been sort of programmed more than I had plans. I would say I was programmed by my mother to go to college, and she was pretty determined that I should be a physician. And I say that because somewhere there exists a first grade questionnaire that children would fill out, and I've seen it. And on the back of it, it says, I was 6 years old. On the back of it, it says, "What do you want to be?" And I wrote doctor, and all my connections with the doctors had been bad, not good. So I know that's the case. But it worked out. I went to college at Weatherford at Southwestern State College. I spent my junior year in Austria with something called the Institutes of European Studies. That's a little bit of a story all to itself. And then after I got out of college, I went to medical school at OU in Oklahoma City. Then I did all of my postgraduate training at Duke in North Carolina.
Okay, so get some of my accent then.
Yeah, and the town of Durham in those days just smelled like tobacco. They were manufacturing it, storing it, and it was quite a thing. And
what was your specialty area?
Endocrinology.
And you came back to Oklahoma to practice?
Right. I got two offers. One was to come back to Oklahoma, and I didn't and I accepted that offer, and then went off to the military, and I was gone for 3 years. We lived in Germany. When that time was over, we came back to the States, and lo and behold, I got an invitation to come back to Duke to interview. Well, so I did, and the chairman of the Department of Medicine was Dr. Weingarten, a very famous metabolic guy. And I said, "Dr. Weingarten, I'd really like to take this job if you can get me access to the Duke Forest. I like to go hunting." "Oh, Jim, I can't do that." And so I came home where I could go hunting and where my family was.
Made your mother happy?
And my father especially happy. Yeah.
Okay, then let's back up. In high school, what was your favorite subject?
English, I guess, or yeah, I'd say English. I don't think we were taught history. I can't remember anything about history from my high school time. I love my English teacher. That was the main thing. Dorothy Ewing was her Ewing. And she was just a remarkable teacher. She was a pretty human being too. She was in her 50s when I was her student, but I adored her. And she taught us a little bit of Chaucer. And that's in Old English. And it's weird sounding stuff. I can't do it now, but I knew the first paragraph of one of his famous poems, and sort of held on to it all the years. Many years later, I always cherished her as a teacher. She had moved away to another school, I lost track. She was from our home area, and she came back for one of our old settlers' days every 5 year thing. And I happened to be there, and I met her, and I went up to her, and I was just smiling from ear to ear. And I started reciting Chaucer to her. Wasn't that a pretty? That's as far as I can really take it now. And she just stared at me. I said, what in the world is going on? And it first hurt my feelings. I was so proud that I still had her teachings, but she had developed dementia. She had developed Alzheimer's in the years as they passed. It was really sad. So I think that'd been my favorite subject.
And at that point, were you living on a farm or in town?
No, I never really lived on a farm. My father grew up on a little farm, but after he began to be on his own and work, he lived in one of the local towns, first Strong City and then Cheyenne. And we lived in a little wooden bungalow, and so my farm experiences were summertime, starting at about age 12. I didn't have a driver's license, but that didn't matter too much in rural Oklahoma back then. And I was a pretty snaky tractor jockey.
I was going to say, do you remember the first time you got on one? You may have.
I don't know if I can quite remember that, but I remember the tractor. It was a Farmall M tractor. We had two of the farm. My dad owned the ground, but he had a partnership with the guy who was the farmer, and it was a crop rent sort of thing. But in the summertime, kind of on the you need to learn the trade, Jimmy, I would go and live with the farmer and his wife, and I was the tractor jockey. My first job was the tractor jockey. We had two M's. One was a narrow front, and the other one had the front wheels way out here. No shade, no wind except natural wind. It was no cool. It was rough stuff. I mean, you're just out there in the baking heat for a long time. It plowed about I'll bet it wasn't over a 5 foot one way. And the fields were big. I mean, every field's 100 acres or more, so it'd take a long time to go.
Farmall M was kind of a large tractor for a young boy back then.
Yeah, I almost turned it over on myself once by going too fast and going up the slope and jerking the clutch and some stuff, but I got it back down. My worst experience, 2 bad experiences. One was on the M. The mechanical connection to the plow was mechanical, not hydraulic. So to put it into the ground and take it out of the ground, there was a rope you'd pull. And so you wouldn't lose this rope. I tied it to the spring on my seat right here, and I didn't reach it. Well, one day after I'd unhooked the plow, I got back on the tractor and gave her full gas, and off I went. But the seat collapsed. I didn't fall off, but I could have fallen off. It's dangerous business, that farming, those machines and all that stuff. I mean, it's easy to see there's so many accidents.
You learned real quick that that wasn't the path you wanted to take for a career?
Well, yeah, I think I did. Because to be a farmer, you got to be an electrician and a plumber and a mechanic and things that just did not go in my head. I to this day can hardly screw in a light bulb. I mean, it's just not my thing. And so I did it until I guess I did it until the first summer of college, or the first summer after I graduated. I was still a farmer, and by then we had a real combine. Before, it was an Alice Chalmer pull behind 5-foot combine, and I was the only helper small enough to crawl into the shaker box where the straw was all shaken and then exited the little combine. That stuff would ball up from time to time and you had to stop. Well, that was a job for Jimmy, get in that thing. And that was unbelievably hot and dusty and it was just terrible. But I was sort of proud because no one else could do it. The farmers were all too big and the other helpers were too big. And I could do it.
And did you get paid?
Yeah, $3, either a week or a day. I can't remember. 1958. I'm thinking more a week, but I cannot remember that precisely.
Okay. And by that time, your father was in the banking business?
Yes, he'd been in the banking business a long time, but then he graduated from high school in the 20s, maybe 22 or 24 or 25 in that time. And he had already gone to work at the bank. The bank that he worked for was in the town of Strong City. That's about 15 miles or so from Cheyenne. And it was a family-owned bank. The owners lived elsewhere by then. And so he started as a janitor, but was clever enough to soon get right into the banking stuff, of being a teller, being a kind of the accountant, and it wasn't long till he was really running the bank. I think he started around 25 in the bank, and he was the president in the early 30s. Then the bank failed. Not his bank, but the bank at Cheyenne failed. And so Strong City State Bank somehow got the remnants. I don't know if they bought it or if the banking regulators just said, here, this is it. Anyway, they moved to Cheyenne, and when they moved, a buddy, a henchman, kind of, a gopher of my father, a man named Mr. Boswell, took the cash over in tow sacks to the other bank, guarded it with a shotgun, took it over to Cheyenne to get the teller's cash and stuff over there. And then he played a role in the conservation, this Mr. Boswell did. So when that comes up, I'll mention that.
Well, let's back up. You say they moved. He was married to your mother by that point?
Yeah, married, but they were on a path towards success, and that didn't include kids. That was by design. So they lived, she was a school teacher, my mother was, from Hammond. I don't know how they did this, whether they lived on my father's salary and saved her salary or the reverse. But that was their plan, and they had some savings. Along came the crash. The price of land went from decent to nothing, and they had money, and they started buying little farms. They kind of got that going, and then decided it'd be time now to have a kid.
Well, then let's back up and tell what their names are. What was your mother's name?
Lorena Gladys Savage.
Okay, and your father?
Lowell Lawrence Males.
And how did he get the nickname Red?
He was a ginger, I think.
Okay.
That's what he had. He had some red even left you can appreciate on that color photo, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got a red hue to it.
And he was born in
Doxy, Oklahoma, 1907. And that's close to Sayre, somewhere in Beckham County.
And had his parents grown up in that area?
No, they came here after the official land run. They came after that, and bought a little, I guess, 160-acre farm from somebody over by Raiden, or in those days it was called Rankin. And my grandfather, farmed with a team, built his own barn, butchered and processed hogs and stuff for food for the winter, smoked the meat, and was good with an axe. He was a honest to goodness hillbilly. And when, as the years went by and his first wife had passed away, he went back to hillbilly part of the world. He met a woman and moved to Clayton, Oklahoma. And Clayton, Oklahoma is right, it's in Pushmataha County, southeast Oklahoma. So he was happy there. He was back in his element.
And do you remember him?
Yes,
Do you
I remember him well. I have his last plug of chewing tobacco. Day's work, one corner cut off of it. I don't really know if I have it anymore, but I had it for many, many years. Kept it in my mother's money bowl or treasure bowl.
So your father would have learned farming from him, probably.
Yes, or he was a hired help kind of farmer. Roger Mills County in those days was one of the biggest producers of broom corn in the nation. And that broom corn business was a terrible, terrible manual work. The plant sort of looked like corn, but instead of ears, it grew these long fibers. That's for making the broom. And you had to cut that off with a special knife. And then it was eventually baled, and then the bales would be transported far from here and really sold and made into the brooms. So I know he did that. I know he herded cattle. He never told me that he drove the team or drove the tractor. I never heard that. So.
Well, along the way, then, where did he pick up the conservation aspect of this? Did they do terraces or?
Not then. No, not then. Terraces. Well, we didn't want to plow up our land for terraces, but we did want to plow up the land, and we were unwise. So when it quit raining and the wind started blowing, and we'd farmed cotton, and there was no cover on the fields then. That's when everything went to hell, and the dust storms and all that began. And somewhere along there, a light went off in my father's head. I don't know where it came from, whether it was from, I don't think from the government agency, because it didn't exist. I don't think the agriculture like we have it now, I don't think that existed until sometime in the 30s.
35.
So this little bank this was still in Strong City. I know that. This was still in the Strong City Bank where my father first started. They bought a surveying gear so that a farmer could survey the lay of his land and build terraces. And they had a pull behind, I think it was a pull behind dump thing that has a name, and I've forgotten that. Do you know what it?
I know what you're talking about.
It's a sledge that's pulled behind the tractor or the horse, and you scoop the dirt up. But then when it's time to
a slip?
yeah,
Kind of like a slip.
yeah, then you tilt it forward and it empties. And this Mr. Boswell, who was the gopher for the bank, would go out with the farmers and they'd lay out these terraces. and make them. A lot of those still exist. They were not redone, but the surveying was not quite perfect, maybe, but it's a good start. And I think the bank provided that just no service. Look, if you terrace your field, it's not going to wash off next time it rains. That caught on. I mean, the farmers could see the value of that.
So that was in the early 30s when he started providing that service.
It was before the federal government had a.
Was he one of the only ones that was doing that?
As far as I don't know the fact, but I mean that's sort of the folk history. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if it's true.
Do you know, did they ever get larger equipment, a greater maintainer later on?
I don't think the bank did. It doesn't have any. It really didn't have any money, so I don't think the bank got a. And I'm afraid all those witnesses are all dead. The last one just got buried a month ago.
How about the equipment? Do you know, is that still around?
The survey stuff is the level, the microscope, the telescope is. I think that's at the bank in Cheyenne.
Really?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
So that would have been manufactured back in the late 20s, probably.
Yeah. It's brass, I think.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Really? But that's the one that they use for laying out terraces in that surrounding area.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Did your father share stories from the Dust Bowl? Any particular ones that stand out?
No. He didn't. He told me when he was near death, when he was in that age, he said, you know, I can't not do this. That's just in me to have this emotional kind of expression when I get to talk about something. Mm-hmm. So I want to try it again. He said, I've had the most remarkable life in a way. I've saw this country before man came, before modern man came. I saw it destroyed. And I got to see it built back.
Yeah. And he had a major role in helping it get built back, from what I understand.
Well, maybe he was telling me that too. I didn't really hear that, but he probably was. His he had a good ego.
And when did he pass away?
1990. Yeah, he timed it right. It was the last day of the first quarter of the year, which made the taxes and all that stuff easier.
Was he still working at that point?
Till just before.
Wow.
It's a real.
Well, he worked into his 80s then.
He worked in the banking business for 60-some years. I don't know.
Oh.
And did your mother teach as long, or?
Just about as long. No, I guess she taught 30 years or something, and would off and on teach. She might have stopped teaching when my little brother was born. I don't remember that, but she was really proud of her teacher's retirement program, and that was a good program for our teachers. I don't know if it still is. I'm unaware of that, but it really was for her.
But she was also quite an accomplished pianist.
She was a good pianist. Much of that self energy, but not totally. And she kept that interest going really until she died too. She played at the church, and she took lessons at OCU from a famous professor when she was an old person. And then OCU, maybe he died. Professor Berg was his name. Maybe he died. And then Weatherford was closer to where she lived. So for many years, she'd go, I think it was once a month, to Weatherford to take piano lessons from the professor of music there. And
did she teach you and your brother?
She... yes and no. She believed in the power of music to enlighten, but her methodology was tyrannical. And I was a free spirit. I had a pony. I wanted a gun. I wanted to ride my horse. She wanted me to take music lessons. I took music lessons from her and then from another woman, her competitor, my mother's competitor. When my mother couldn't make any headway, sent me to her competitor, Miss Chalfant. That was even worse. After 8 years, I could read music and I could play the right hand a little bit, but I never learned to play with the left hand. And I hated every minute of it, and I wasn't going to learn it. I forcibly did not learn to play the piano because I refused to. And she tried everything, including physical beatings and so forth. But kids are clever. And my mom was neither a good cook nor a good housekeeper. And I knew that. And so I took the razor strap, that was her favorite ultimate weapon. I took that sucker and put it between the two mattresses, in the middle, between the two mattresses in the guest bed in our home, knowing that it would never be discovered. It'll never have that top mattress turned over. And never was.
She didn't get another one?
No, not with that.
Oh.
So, in fact, we didn't get along, my mother and I. And I falsely accused her in my mind of being a tyrant. I don't think she really was. It's just that I didn't like taking orders from her, and I don't know why. After my dad died, my brother confirms this, we began to see her in a more fair light, because he was very subtly controlling, and everything really was determined by him. I didn't hear the controlling discussions between them ever, but the thrust of the family function, he said that. And she was she wanted to be a star. She was a showbiz kind of a show-off person and like that. And she couldn't do that while he was present. When he died, she was completely true to him all the way. But when he died, she fell in love again. She was 80-something. And she fell in love with Jack Knight, a retired old cowboy from Elk City. And for about 15 years, they had just this wonderful new life together. And I began to like her and get along with her much better than I had earlier.
Interesting.
Well, did your father weigh in on the music lessons?
No, the only time he ever, he did encourage that quietly some way, but the only time he ever laid the law down on anything music was when I was in school, in junior high school or grade school. Cheyenne started a school band, and I didn't want anything to do with the band. That was my tendency, but he said, Jimmy, you're going to play the trumpet. I said, no, Dad, I don't want to do that. And it went on like that for a little while, but finally he really, really let me have it. You're going to play that damn trumpet, something like that. And I was a tiny bit better at the trumpet than I was with the piano, but not too much. However, when I got to, by the time my family and I were stationed in Germany, that was in 1970, I had that year of living in Austria behind me, and I took German in college, and so I knew a little bit of German. I could read music, I could blow a trumpet a little bit, and lo and behold, all those things came together in Germany, and I got invited to join a German hunting horn blowing group. And we practiced every Monday night on how to blow these signals. They were important because that was before cell phones and all that stuff. And these signals were used when they would have drive hunts in the forest. When to start the shooting and when to stop the shooting and blah, there was a horn call for all that. And so I got all I got my hobby love of hunting, and it all came back to my mother who wanted me to be in music, and my dad who said I must, and I objected to, but it really paid off.
And did you thank him for it at that point?
Yeah. And I don't know, no, I'm not 100% sure they ever saw us perform. These groups would compete. Once a year, there would be a competition among various hunting groups in each German state. And the one we lived in was Bavaria. And our group won the gold medal one year and the silver medal the other year. And I think it was a fantastic experience.
All from your start in Little Cheyenne.
That's right, with music.
Music.
Yeah.
Did you meet your wife in Germany then? When you were...
No. I met my wife after that year in Austria. So that was the end of my junior year in college, and my folks came over, including my little brother, and we bought a old rattle trap. I'd purchased it earlier with Dad's money, an old rattle trap car. Turned out it was a Mercedes-Benz, but it was ancient. And we toured on it, and we left Vienna and went up through Germany and up into Scandinavia, and in Copenhagen at a concert. We were all together. My wife was in the row ahead of us, and I spoke to her, and I don't know, things just kind of took the course. And then a year later, we got married in Denmark.
And she came to Oklahoma with you.
Yeah, it was a shock. I sent her snapshots, and it was of my dad's farm that's on used to be called Dead Indian Creek, now Dead Warrior Creek. And they were photographs taken in April. Gorgeous, everything, green, water, everything. I sent her these pictures, and then she wrote back and said, well, that just looks like Denmark. Well, but when we got to Oklahoma, it was August. Everything was burned up. And I can't quite remember. We drove from Baltimore here, or from New York. And then we got to Oklahoma. I mean, just, she was getting more and more and more shocked. Was, well, you sent me these pictures. I said, well, yeah, but that was in the springtime when things grew.
What year was that then?
That was 1962.
But she stayed.
She did stay, but looking back, I'm not sure she stayed freely. Well, we had our first child. So I know she did stay, but it's not easy for someone from another culture to come into a culture that's pure of its own. And when we got to an urban area like Oklahoma City, there were other European women she met, and some Danish people too, but largely it was a struggle, and she gave it her all. But I think I kind of suspicion if she had had her choice after about a year or two, she'd have said, I believe I'll go back where it's green all the time.
Did her family ever come over here?
Yes. Her father was a school superintendent of a moderate-sized school system in Denmark, and her mom was a musician, a pianist, but not in the school system. She had a sister and a brother.
Do you have a favorite memory of your dad back dealing with conservation or from early on? What's your earliest memory of him doing something conservation-wise? That's an easier question.
Well, so I was only 13 when this happened.
When Stanco.
So I was pretty little. I knew about everybody knew about this construction because of all the construction workers that would come in the county, and that was my first job, first official job. And I remember because I had to go get a Social Security card. And when you go to the post office, in those days you get the Social Security card, and it was cardboard, and so crummy. I mean, they wouldn't last. So I laminated mine with Scotch tape, and I had it for years and years, and I don't have it anymore.
What was your job?
I was a flunky, a total flunky thing around these construction things. I didn't do anything. I didn't like it. That was one of the two jobs that I really didn't like. The other was being a flunky on highway construction. There was a highway being built between Durham and Sweetwater down to Erie. And they needed help, and I wasn't getting much pay at the farm. At $3 an interval was not very much. So this was 4 or 5 times that much salary. So, that's for me. But my job was to stand by the fill and watch for these machines dumping the dirt, that they didn't dump limbs and branches and things that would be bad for the roadbed in there. I gave that up after a couple of weeks. I got a nice paycheck, but it was not worth it.
So how long did you do both of those jobs?
Oh, not long. I don't know. Not really. No, I don't remember it being long. Maybe the summer months on the government, but I don't think so. More like a month. And my wild side kicked in. I didn't want to do that.
Have you been back to some of the places where you were at, where they constructed them? And
I can't quite remember on what site we did the construction work. I think it was out toward Berlin, in that group. I can't remember exactly. No, I haven't been to those, but I've been to lots of the sites because I was a big duck hunter in the earlier time. It's no good right now. The duck flighting has changed. But from the 60s until for 30 years at least, this was a wonderful place to hunt ducks. And have you ever tried hunting ducks? The beauty of it is you learn to identify these there's a whole bunch of species, different ducks, and you can learn to identify them by their wing patches or their bill, and they make noise. It's just great fun. But that's been lost, and it has nothing to do with the conservation program, but they don't come to our water anymore.
Well, do we have enough water for them to come? Is the
well,
part of the
yeah,
issue, I guess.
I don't know. I don't know. I think the maintenance of the sites and structures has become an issue because of its cost, and maybe political will or whatever, those factors that have influenced it.
Well, and he also had something to do with the conservation district when it got started out there.
Yeah.
Do you have any recall of that?
No, but I know that all of his non-work buddies were also somewhat connected to that. A man named Solly Hyatt, he's in some of the pictures when they identify, and a man named C.R., but he went by Speck Lester. And those are the two that I remember, but he had several, and they were all kind of involved in this.
so you would have been in your early teens when the Sandstone Creek project was really in its heyday for constructing all of those dams.
No, see, I think this sign was made at the end of it, and that's made in 1953, so I would have been 13
13
then.
at the end of it, yeah.
So
you really didn't have many memories of your dad organizing and...
well,
getting
a little
that
bit.
going?
Now, one part, his main job, well, maybe he had planning powers I don't know anything about, but my understanding of his main job then was to go to the farmer and get the easement for the pond. And a stranger couldn't have done that probably. So he did it, and he did it with vigor, and he was persistent. I suppose he failed sometimes to get one, but I never heard of it. I didn't know that. And he'd come home and tell my mother, you know, I went to see so-and-so on Barnett's Creek, and we got the easement. He'd be real excited about it.
So he did more than just in Roger Mills County too, where some of those were.
Yeah, but it was in the region. Barnett's is over by Hammond, so that might be in Custer County. I'm not sure.
I suspect being the local banker probably didn't hurt any either. When
That's what I think. That was the lever. That was his. It got him in the door, and then the process itself made pretty good sense. The farmer didn't give up much land. I don't know how many acres in one of those, but not a quarter or anything like that. And in return, he got water. And if he had land below the dam, it wasn't going to wash away. So I think they pretty much went for it.
Did you ever hear how he got involved in the watershed program itself and became such a leader in that early days?
No, I don't know. And I don't know who to ask. I'm one of the few still around that has some connection. His real buddy in the conservation department was Bob Wright, and he's been dead forever, and his son's dead. And so I don't know who to ask.
It sounds like Bob Wright and he were really close.
Very close.
Friendly, as well as going out and talking with groups and meetings.
Yes, and in the beginning of I've forgotten what my brother called my dad's talk. It became the common jargon for it. The unending story, or the last word, or something. When they would travel, when he'd be invited somewhere to speak, initially he and Jim Bob went on those trips. And not Jim Bob, but Bob Wright, the father, was the projectionist and the technical expert. He knew all of the scientific questions that might come up. And my dad was the lecturer. Then later, Bob Wright, maybe it had to do with traveling out of state. I didn't know it then, but I often went along with my dad when he went out of Oklahoma, and I would be his projectionist. And it was a lucky part of my education growing up. I mean, I went to a lot of places.
Did you fly or drive?
Fly? Well, if it's close, we'd drive, but I can remember one flight. We were going to Lima, Ohio, and we got as far as the city where Purdue University is. Do you know what that is in Indiana? And anyway, our plane, it was a DC-3, I think. And the plane got sick, and we had to have an emergency landing there at the university.
Oh my God.
But they fixed it, and we flew on the next day.
So what kind of groups would you talk to in Ohio? Other groups that were trying to form?
Yeah. So I think that's what it was. Other conservation area people.
So how old would you have been then?
Well, 14 maybe, 13, 14, 15, somewhere in there.
That would have been quite an experience.
Oh boy, was it. Well, we took a train once to Chicago, and I'm sure, I can't remember the conservation angle to that Chicago trip, but I'm sure it was. And it was just my dad and myself.
What other states did you go to that you recall?
Well, Ohio and Illinois are the two that I really remember. Texas.
Get up to Kansas?
Can't remember. I don't know. I can't remember.
I had heard the story that Bob Wright would not fly.
Oh, I don't know.
He was afraid of flying, so that kind of ties in with.
Well, that'd be about the only thing he was afraid of. He was a real bombastic guy, and in my early time of knowing each other, I really adored him because he had been in the service for years, the Korean War time, and he brought all of his service stuff home, including lots of outdoory gear. And so when he learned, by then he and my dad were friends, and he learned I liked to go duck hunting and stuff like that. He gave me all of his stuff, a super duper woolen underwear and gloves and all kinds of things. But he was this bombastic personality, and I played, our only real sport in Cheyenne was basketball. And if you got little Jimmy Males on your team, you're not going to see many balls dunked. So I really went to a new gymnasium, a real nice gymnasium, and the railing came right down to the court. And Jim and Bob Wright would always be sitting on the nearest to the court he could get. And he didn't believe in letting the coach do the coaching. He'd prefer to do it. And he had this loud voice, and one day he screamed at me, I've forgotten what it was, but turn left or duck or something. But it was so loud and so directed at me. I mean, calling me by my, Jimmy, do this, do that. I wanted to hit him in the kitchen with a basketball. But he finally got a good athlete in his family. I was sort of adopted family. His son was a real good athlete when he came along, became a lawyer. But he died, just like his daddy, of heart disease, way too early.
You know, when you went around to these meetings, would your dad give essentially the same presentation of each one?
Yep, and it's written, it's a text. And that's somewhere in here. I've seen it. Slide 1, slide 2.
Do you have the script that he used?
I think so. I'm not sure, but I'll provide you with this for your study if you want it.
Absolutely. Would you mind sharing that for a while?
Of course not.
No. What about the slides themselves?
The slides were a 35 millimeter slides. They were not covered with glass or anything. It was just like you'd get them from the drugstore. You got them back from the development. And it was a straight cartridge. I don't know how many slides would have. I don't believe we had 2 cassettes. I think it was 1 cassette, so 50 or 80 or something slides. And I'm convinced that there is a cassette that's still in existence, but I can't find it.
We had asked Joe Yall out there.
Right.
And he thought it was in the bank vault at the bank. But then I think I'd heard that somebody looked at it and they could not find it in there. But I thought I didn't realize the script was available, but that would be interesting to see what was
it's in there. I've glanced over. He says, this is Joe Brown, who now has great sorghum growing below the dam. It's in here.
So that's a real piece of history, an important piece of history.
I wish I have a unconfirmed guilty conscience that actually someone gave me the cassette, and I brought it home and delegated its storage to my wife. Now she's passed on. I don't know where it is. So maybe it won't be too long. There'll be my heirs will be over here rummaging around with all this stuff up in the attic, and maybe they'll find it then.
But those meetings would have occurred in the early to mid 50s, probably mid 50s. You would have been 15 then, I guess.
Yeah, that'd be about right. But I think it really got going nationwide more like toward the 60s when it began a snowball-like effect of construction.
Well, those projects like Sandstone Creek and Barnett's Creek and Dead Indian Creek you were talking about, that was all part of the Flood Control Act 1944.
Yeah.
Oklahoma was one of the leaders getting started.
Right.
But then that evolved into National Watershed Program, which is PO 566, and that was signed by President Eisenhower in 1954.
Okay.
So everyone was interested about those. So that fits in very nicely.
Uh-huh.
In the mid 50s, people were trying to find out about this program. So but that was, he was one of the national leaders in terms of the go-to people for what's really about this watershed program and why should we be involved in it.
And that he really knew that point. He believed it in a Messiah, like the Messiah. I mean, he really believed that was all we need to do, and we did. It needed to be done.
And we have a picture of President Eisenhower looking at a display of the Sandstone Creek watershed in Washington, D.C. in the USDA building.
Oh, man.
And the Secretary of Agriculture, we think, is the other person who was looking at that, and Eisenhower was pointing to some of the items. And we've heard that red males and President Eisenhower had some conversations about the watershed program. Do you
Well, I thought, now, I don't know this to be fact though. My memory is that Mr. Males boarded the plane with him in Woodward or somewhere. I didn't really realize it was at Woodward.
Well, we understand Eisenhower came out in 1955 out to Oklahoma, and then came out to Woodward in 1957.
Okay, well, I always thought that my dad and Eisenhower flew on a plane and talked while they flew.
The story that we had heard was that he came out to Oklahoma in 1957 because one of his aides was a C.A. Wheeler, and he wanted him to see the effect of the drought personally. And when he got here, I guess he was going on to Texas, and the story I had heard is that President Eisenhower asked red males if he could get on the plane and go on that leg because he wanted to talk about the watershed program. Never have confirmed that, but that's
I can't,
that's the story.
but that rhymes with the stuff that I remember from.
Do you recall your dad ever talking about any conversations he had with President
Not
Eisenhower?
specific, well, that he had a conversation with him, yes. But what they discussed, exactly, no. I don't think he got my dad's vote either. Even though he was a remarkable president. My father was a Republican when he first could vote, but he became a Democrat at about the Roosevelt time, and for the reason that he thought the Republican Party skinned the poor people, didn't care for them. So he was a yellow dog. So I don't suppose that he ever voted for Eisenhower. And he despised Reagan. I thought Reagan was, wow, what a wonderful communicator and all this. No, sir, not my dad.
Well, he was a very, very important person, a very important leader for the watershed program. I've heard more stories about him. I was so excited when I first heard that he had a son that was living here in Edmond, and that's how we all connected. That's you look at a lot of documents. And do you recall him talking with some of the other watershed leaders, Dick Longmire or Dick?
Yes, I remember that. I don't know anything about their conversations, but I know that name.
And there was Nolan Fuqua.
Yes.
And Humphreys and Lloyd Church.
Yes, I remember that. They were all on the water board, I think.
Yes, yeah, or they were all part of these early leaders in the watershed program that went on. I'd heard that they had quite a bond between them.
There's my father really loved his service on the Oklahoma Water Resources Board. He was on there. I think he was an original member.
A charter member.
And there's a good story about it, but I don't know if you want to hear it. If I should tell you. You can always edit it out if it's okay. No. So, my family, my wife and my two kids, we came back to Oklahoma in 1970. We finished all our training at Duke and came back here where I had a job as the chief resident in the medicine department. So
here in Oklahoma City?
Yeah, in Oklahoma City. And we had a little house over in the village that I remember. And my folks then could come to visit us more often. When we were in North Carolina, they couldn't. We didn't see them very often. So one day, my mom and dad showed up at our house, and my dad's attitude was just strange. He was sad, emotional, like I got in that comment. And I said, Dad, what's wrong? He said, well, they're going to kick me off the water board. And I said, well, why? Well, Dewey Bartlett, no, it wasn't Dewey Bartlett. It was a Democratic. It was the Democrat governor that followed Dewey Bartlett, maybe. I think he might have gone to the Huskow eventually, this Democratic guy. I can't remember. But anyway, that Democratic governor was cleaning house, and anybody who had ever been appointed by a Republican governor was out. That included ULL red males. Well, okay, well, earlier that year, there's a day in Oklahoma called Doctor's Day. And Doctor's Day is when people from the medical profession go over to the state capitol and have a little office and doctor on the representatives and the senators, whoever wants to come to the office. And I did that year. Here comes several of our state congressmen. One of them, the guy from Edmond, and one was a senator who had silvery, long hair, and he was having a serious anxiety attack because the Black Panthers had taken down or threatened to take down or do something with all the flags that fly out in front of the state capitol. It might have been there was a Confederate flag. I don't know that, but it had something to do with the flags, and it was a Black Panther movement, and this guy was having this anxiety attack. But that had nothing to do with Mr. Mayos. So he was getting kicked off. And my third case that day of the officials was Senator Gene Stipe. And he is your size of a man, a really big guy. How you doing, Doc? Yeah, where are you from, Doc? He was really good at this human business. I said, well, I'm from Rocky Mills County. Oh, yeah. Well, I used to hang out quite a lot with old Studs McColgan. That was C.C. God McColgan, we thought it was. We voters, I mean, the folks back home didn't know he was called Studs. Or at least I didn't. And my dad was a good friend of him too. So, Doc, I tell you, I've got a bad tooth. I need a shot of penicillin. So, well, the senator let me examine him. His tooth looked awful healthy. Now, they didn't say anything. Well, you want to go see your own doctor, Senator? No, Doc, I need this penicillin shot today. So, I mean, I kind of got the message, and we poked the penicillin to him. When he's through, he said, Doc, you ever need my help? Just give me a call. Lo and behold, I said, well, Dad, I got this chit with Gene Stipe. I think it'd be time to call it in. Is it okay with you if I contact him? Yeah, son, sure. Called him. 3 days later, phone call, LL back on the water board.
Oh, that is a neat story. And then he stayed on for some time after that.
Yeah, he stayed on until he died. I don't know exactly when he quit going.
Wow.
Do you know why he was so keen on staying on the board? What was the attraction?
No, it was decision making. I think he liked that, and he also felt like he kind of represented the little water movement as opposed to the Keystone Reservoir kind of movement. The Big Damn Foolishness. There's a book called that by one of the authors in this time.
Peterson.
Yeah.
Have you read that?
And I flipped through it. Yeah.
It's all the things that your dad was working on
Right,
at that
right.
time. That's interesting. Well, and at that time in the water board, that was the formulation time of coming up with state policy on how they're going to deal with all of this. So again,
It's strange how this water politics and my medical career has intersected. I told you on the phone, but I still can't remember the executive director's name. But I attended that year I was here before going to the Army as a doctor. I attended a meeting with my dad at the water board. And the executive director would be asked a question, and he'd pick up a document and he'd start reading it like this. And I mean, I didn't know what that was, but I know you're not supposed to read letters like that. Something's wrong with your vision. And it wasn't so long after that, maybe a year, 6 months after that, a prominent neurosurgeon called me and said, "Hey, Jim, I've got this guy with a big pituitary gland tumor, and he's almost gone blind from it, and I'd like you to see him." And look, here this fella comes to my office, and lo and behold, that's who it was.
oh,
And we worked together. He was my patient for many, many, many years. But I can't remember his name. If I heard it, I'd know it, but I can't recall it. 1970.
yeah, that was before Barnett. Yeah, yeah, I know. Interesting. I understand back in 1984, that Governor George Nye designated
Oh, yeah.
that date as Red Males Day, and I think that's when they named the street.
Yeah, I suppose the inception came from the village, from the town. And then they asked the governor to do it. I think so.
Were you there that day?
Yep, I was there.
What do you recall on what all happened that day?
Well, I just recall that I thought my dad's going to have a heat stroke. It was April, wasn't it?
July 7th.
Oh my gosh! Then I remembered it being the spring, but maybe the spring date was the
Sergeant Major.
yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, that was April 14th.
Well, I should never have had it in July. And boy, it was hot and the concrete and the beaten down, and there was a whole lot of little ceremonies going on. And he came close to the heat stroke, I'm sure, but he loved every minute of it. Got to throw out the first pitch and at a ball game, and I can't remember what else they.
And that's when they named the main street there?
Yeah, it's 283 highway where it comes through there.
Yeah.
But they named him the full. They could have just called it Males Avenue or something, or
Males.
LL Red Males.
Yeah.
LL Red Males Avenue. And we lived at 800. That was our address.
800 on Red Males Avenue?
Well, it was called 800 South Main back then.
I see.
That's what it turned out to be.
Well, talking about that spring one, then jump ahead a few years to April 14th of 2000. Were you at that
Yes.
celebration?
Yes.
What do you recall on that one?
Well, I recall there wasn't quite as big a crowd as I thought would be there. This was a dam that was on,
Sergeant Major.
yeah, but I know the farmers, we called it by the owner's name. It's not wasn't Spec Lester's. That doesn't matter, but I had been on that reservoir a lot as a late teenager hunting ducks. That was what I could walk to from Cheyenne. And I remember the new earthwork at the pond that day at the site. I can't remember too much more.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was along; she was there, and my wife, and I guess all of the local soil conservation people were there.
That was the very first dam in the nation the very first one of these watershed dams in the nation that was rehabilitated to current standards with a new 100-year design life.
Fantastic.
That
How
was-
many have been done since, I wonder?
There's been 354 funded and 161 completed so far.
And there are how many structures across the United States?
11,800. A ways to go.
Yeah, and the money issue.
But that started, those 11,000 dams started with your dad.
Yeah.
And there's now 2,107 here in Oklahoma. So in that watershed map, all those black dots, every one of those is a dam. And that all started, the very first dam was down in Cordell in 1948. So that was about the time that your dad was really getting engaged.
Yeah.
And that was the first dam in the nation.
And then the war, well, that was after the war, 48
After the
was
war.
over.
Mm-hmm.
But 44, when the law passed, it was wartime on it.
Exactly. In 48, the very first dam in the nation was built down by Cordell.
How was it that the sandstone watershed was chosen? Well, maybe there were several, and this one just got completed before.
That's exactly right. There were several others, and the story I've heard is that Red Males was the one behind it and wanted to make sure that there was, I think, 24 dams in the project, and he wanted to make sure that all of them got completed at one time, because they all work as a system, because each one of them stores a little bit.
Yeah.
And then that's what he used as a story later on, that it's not just one dam, you have to get all your neighbors involved.
Right.
And that's what became the story from that point forward. And I don't know if you've seen the highway map, state highway map. There's a little red notation on that. It says the world's first flood prevention project.
Right.
And that was a result of that effort.
Right. The sign is gone now. This, and they could have redone it, and if you drove this highway 283 from Sayre north, this is on the right-hand side at the town of Berlin, at the intersection to Berlin. And it had locally constructed it. I thought it was great, but it's all gone. They haven't rebuilt it.
But they do have one of the historic markers there, one of the green metal ones.
Yeah.
Talks about sandstone.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
So and it's looking pretty old. Right?
Yeah, there's one up at Roll, and it's barbed wire, baling wire together. We need the historical people to get in somebody's pocket and redo them.
Well, that's an important piece of history there.
Well, he lived through the peak of the flood control structure building.
Yes, in 1965, that was the peak year. And in Oklahoma, there was 165 dams built in Oklahoma that year. And nationwide, it was around 600.
Oh, that's something.
And that's right in his heyday.
Yeah,
That was the buildup. If you think the very first one's 1948, and 17 years later, 600 in 1 year and 160 in Oklahoma.
But somehow, I'm not saying this really critically, but heavens to Betsy, but it could have been foreseen some way that these dams needed TLC over time. And we needed money. We needed a plan for.
Well, part of the program that he helped develop was that these dams were built with 100% federal money. But the local sponsors, they aren't federal dams, they're locally owned by the conservation district, like the Upper Washita Conservation District. But they signed an agreement before the construction that said that like in this case, Upper Washita Conservation District would agree to operate and maintain all of these dams for at least 50 years. And they have done that, and they've done a relatively good job at it. But when you had so many of them, and now they're getting so old, the funding for maintenance is really an issue.
Yeah, I see it. I see it. But it's a worthwhile use of tax dollars. If we don't want to go back to floods. The Hammond flood of 33 or 34, whenever it was.
34.
The family myth, my mother would tell me this over and over and over as a child. Yeah, Daddy went out and save somebody who was in the flood at Hammond or at Strong City. I'm not quite, maybe it was at Strong City. Well, I don't really think that was true. I think that was an embellishment. I think all the young men went out to try to help, and he was among them. I don't, but if you come across any factual proof that he was out there pulling people in on a rope, well, I'd like to know it.
I don't think I've seen any reference where he was mentioned specifically other than the local neighbors.
Yeah. Well, my mother was colorful. She may have added that poetic license in that story. As I got older, I began to try to find out. I never asked my father, I don't think.
Where was your mother living in 1934 during the Hammond flood?
Well, they were married, I think. They were in Strong City or in Cheyenne.
So Strong City was kind of right in the midst.
That's right. No, it's right on the Washita too. So it would have flooded.
Were they impacted by the flooding?
No, I don't think physically impacted, but they were called out to. Downtown Strong City is not but a few 100 yards. I mean, maybe 1,000 yards from the bed of the Washita River. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure when it was flooded, they could get down there. It was the bridge that was taken out, I guess. People were on the bridge, maybe. I don't know.
Well, the story is the Adams family, their house was floated off of their foundation, and they went upstairs as it was floating down there, and they ended up chopping through the roof to get on the roof. And then the story is that it smashed into the railroad bridge, and 5 of the members of the Adams family were killed.
In Hammond?
Yes.
Yeah.
They were.
I think my folks were in Strong City.
Do you know, did they have any friends or relatives that were killed? Or
don't know that. I don't know that.
I read the story where they estimated between 200 and 300 people were left homeless because of the flood.
You know, in those days, Roger Mills County had a population of 30,000. Now it's a population of less than 5,000. So, I mean, when you first hear that figure, that many people became homeless, you think, how in the world? When you know current Roger Mills geography or whatever the science of the people. But there was a family on every quarter. Mm-hmm. On every 160 acres, there was a little family that they had to survive on that.
So how old would your dad have been in 1934?
20-something. He was born in 07.
Okay, so he'd been like 27 years old. So he would have been
a vigorous, strong guy. And he was
very much involved.
Yeah.
And he
probably Mr. Boswell with him too. They became farming partners together, incidentally.
And that flood, and that one alone, and there was a few others around the country. That's what ended up being the impetus for the Flood Control Act of 1936.
The mass shooting of the time, wasn't it? In a way.
It's 1936, and then they studied the projects, and then 1944, then the Washita River Basin was in there. So he lived right in the midst of the formation, the causes, and then took advantage of that effort to spread the word and had the legislation.
He didn't have a urge to try to make it to his benefit financially or politically. My dad had no interest that I saw of rising to leadership positions in the Democratic Party. He was a donor at the local level. He didn't want to be a functionary, and he never conceived that it would be right to get any financial advantage from. I don't know that he ever took payment for any of these trips that he took. I don't think he got paid per diem or anything. I think it was all on his own, but I don't know that 100% for sure.
Well, he received a lot of awards and recognitions and all in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
Do you recall any that were really stood out where he talked about or that you had memories of?
He was modest that way. He didn't talk about it too much. He really was happy that he met President Eisenhower. That was a high point for him. But other than that, and by then I wasn't a regular family member anymore. I was only occasionally there. The plaques and things, his wife would put up on the on the thing on the fireplace, the plank,
The mantle?
the mantle of the fireplace, and they were proud of them, but he didn't ever carry on.
Do you still have those?
I don't know. I don't have them.
Mm-hmm.
My brother might. The bank might.
That could be.
I've seen that watershed man of the year thing, so I'm guessing it's the bank, but I do not know.
Interesting. Who has the bank now?
But it's still in our family.
What is? Mm-hmm.
My son is the chairman of the board. I'm the vice chairman of the board.
Huh.
And the president's a man named Stuart Sander, Sander.
In 1985, he got the Water Pioneer Award. Is that one of the ones?
That's from the Water Board. That's Oklahoma Water Resources Board has the Pioneer. What year was that?
1985.
1985.
And then both parents were inducted into the Western Oklahoma Hall
Right.
of
Right,
Fame.
right,
Not
right.
the same year, but
Right. I was at both of those things. They were in Elk City, yeah.
1985 was my first summer here in Oklahoma,
Huh.
and I had heard of red males in other states
I'll
on my
be
water
damned.
program. And when I first came here, I was at the Water Board conference, and when he received his Pioneer of the Year, I remember telling my wife, I met red males today."
Something. Isn't that something? I wish I'd have known that. Of course, I wouldn't say I was as modest as he. He really was a modest man.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't need that. He was self-confident in himself, but I would have loved, I would have loved that, to see that about my daddy being hot shot. And
Were you there when they gave him the Pioneer? Wasn't that the conference? They still do that. They still select one or two people each year.
Well, that's good program.
And
And
list
I'm
them all
kind of
out.
crossways with the water board. The clerical side of it, they keep track of whether you've sent in your membership fees and things like that. And they're they're Nazis on that. And so, but they've done great work for our state.
Mm-hmm.
and then your dad went to D.C. and did some lobbying for various things.
I don't know that. I am not aware of that.
Okay.
I'd heard he made one visit to D.C. anyway.
Well, that's good.
For
Sure.
hearings.
Makes sense for,
Mhm.
and he was on the Food and Fiber Committee, and they met at different places throughout the country. It went on for a couple of years, or
LBJ appointed him to that. I was reading it. 1965.
Yeah, that would have been during his heyday on all of this work. Wouldn't it?
Yeah. He liked Lyndon,
Yeah.
and he liked the Speaker of the House from Texas, Rayburn. He thought Sam Rayburn was God Almighty, right up there with FDR. There was two.
Those are the.
Lodestars, I think.
What just your personal observations or whatever from the time you were in high school and early years until now, have you seen a marked difference out in western Oklahoma that you could attribute to the watershed program? Did you really experience, you might not have experienced the annual flooding that occurred before all the damage.
Well, I didn't experience it in full glory, but it was common practice when a flood like that came. My dad would want to drive out and see what the dead Indian Creek, now dead Warrior Creek, was doing, because there's a highway bridge north of Cheyenne, and when that baby was flooding, it would at least fill the bridge, if not go over it. I remember seeing those waters, brown flood water, just going like blazes. And this stream goes on through his farm. He had an 800-acre farm that he bought, and it straddles that stream as it goes down towards Strong City. When the flood times came in the pre-agricultural Oklahoma, it was a meandering stream. After a white farmer came and plowed, then it became this raging storm when it would flood, and the bed of the creek changed. And sand silt went everywhere. It was a mess. So he could study that all, and it's right on his own farm, and he got real proud of it in those 60 years. That was the time we would be out on that farm together, and I can remember him saying, "Oh, look at this beautiful water," and it was about a yard wide. The creek was full of good, clean water, or maybe 2 feet deep. It really was pretty. But it's eroded, and it's not like that now. That creek, it's a little more silted and stuff, but it still flows through there.
Was there one of these watershed dams on his property?
Yeah, it's one. It was a bribery kind of a structure, I think. I guess we'll edit that out. We don't want to say it right. I don't think he had a thing to do with it. I think the our watershed planners, wanted to give him something in recognition for his work for them, and they concocted kind of a half-ass site that they could say, okay, we'll build one here. And it's just barely on his property, the dam is, but it never had water. Never held water.
Was that in Dead Indian Creek?
Yeah. I think it's a tributary of Dead Indian Creek.
I see.
I don't know if it's named or not.
Well, as I mentioned before, there's been a lot of descriptions and documents talking about the benefits of the watershed program, and I've read a lot of those. But honestly, the one that I saw in the report called the Washita, I think it was published in about 1964. LL Red Males had the final document, kind of a testimonial on there, and made a copy of that. And if you'd be willing, if you could read through that testimonial, I think that says the benefits of the watershed program as well as anybody could describe it. But,
I'd be happy to do it, but I need a little lubrication on my voice. The following is a quote from LL Red Males in a report entitled The Washita, November 1964. Quote, "It grows more difficult each day to tell in a few words the economic benefits of the watershed program in our area. We haven't lost crops, bridges, roads, or livestock since our project was installed. In fact, instead of losing crops and other property to floods with the sad economic effects this brings to people, we are now harvesting more of our own crops and spending the money ourselves. This can be seen in our new barns, new tractors and cars, and new homes on Barnett's, Sandstone, Dead Indian, and other creeks. On one 6-mile road out of Cheyenne, 6 farm families lived a few years ago with an aggregate annual income of less than $40,000. Today, 14 families live out there, and their aggregate annual income is over $250,000. 5 of these are father-son partnerships. 6 use irrigation water from the dams, which help stabilize the livestock industry for the whole area by furnishing a source of hay. Another bonus benefits the recreation. Water-based recreation is something we had never dreamed about in this dry area, and now everybody goes for it. All the farmers have boats. All the bank clerks who can afford them have them too. Almost any weekend, at least 100 cars will be parked around just 2 of these reservoirs. There will be some cars around other reservoirs, but these 2 are the favorites. Near one of these lakes, 2 country stores now prosper where only one could prosper before. And these 2 stores sell about 1,000 out-of-state fishing licenses per year. Our dream of an area with the hills and waving grass and the bottoms protected from floods and producing abundantly from intensified farming with a pool of beautiful sparkling water here and there is rapidly becoming a reality. What it does for people, perhaps, is the best measuring stick, and our people must be prospering because our bank totals of resources have gone from $100,000 at the low mark of the dirty 30s to nearly $5 million in December 1963. So sorry, Maria.
I think that tells the benefit of the watershed program. And
Well, I'm sure I flubbed it at the end.
That was very good. I appreciate you doing that.
Okay, but I read the date wrong. The end.
No, you did good. You did good. Thank you for doing that.
Since he was such a spokesperson for this, I understand international travelers and visitors came.
Yeah, oh yeah, that was a big deal. A big deal because they'd come to the Sandstone Creek region, and the town there is Cheyenne. That's where his business was. That's where the cafes were and so forth. And so they'd go tour the sites. Maybe they'd have a lecture in the morning, then go tour the sites, and then be back in town. They'd go to the cafes. So people from Taiwan or from India, Bangladesh, and places like that end up in downtown Cheyenne. So it was a real spectacle for the townspeople.
And you recall some of those?
No, I don't really recall
Not
any
the
of it.
people, but just them coming to town.
Yes, that I remember.
When would that have been about? What year?
Well, it's all fuzzy to me. So it must have been the 50s.
50s?
Be my guess. 50s, early 60s.
And Cheyenne was a hopping little town at that point.
Cheyenne was a wonderful little town to grow up in, and had culture and a drive for education, a drive to music, and it had little stores. We had an ice cream parlor. We had 2 barbers, and it's almost gone now.
Would they ever have a parade, like a Christmas parade, or?
Yeah. My brother was Santa Claus one year. I remember that. I didn't see it, but I remember that. And then every 5 years we have a jam-up big parade, the old settlers reunion, floats and bands and longhorn cattle and cowboys and.
You still have that?
Yeah, but it's loose. All of the old settlers are now dead, and it gets diluted. As a boy, I can remember the town being just packed, several thousand people there, and it's not like that anymore.
Did it have a movie theater?
Yep, the Rook will take your donations if you'd like to contribute to its rehabilitation. We're trying to. It was a wonderful theater. Built in the 30s, or maybe 40, maybe 1940. Art Deco kind of looking thing. Two aisles of seats going down. They had the newest, best movies. I don't know how this little family operation did that, but they did. The newest John Wayne, Gone with the Wind, and things, and in a timely way. But television got it, and it struggled and struggled and struggled. And finally, sold. It's changed hands, but there is a county-wide movement to try to rehabilitate it. I doubt it. Maybe I just can't see that they can raise enough money to restore this old building that take thousands and thousands.
And then maintain it afterwards.
But it's not. They don't foresee it being its old movie theater life. but the theater, stage, and all of that could be used for events and competitions and things. And I hope it works.
Where was the bank on? Was it on Main Street?
Uh,
It is, I
At
guess.
Broadway. Main Street comes north and south, and Broadway runs east and west. And the bank is on, it hasn't moved, is on the corner of Broadway and it used to be First Street. And the movie theater, a few buildings to the east.
And I take it you never were a clerk?
No,
You didn't choose to
I
go
never
the bank route?
clerked, but the movie theater was owned by the town's leading Republican. The bank was operated by the town's leading Democrat. And these guys played golf together. But they weren't buddy, but they knew each other well.
Was church an important part of your growing up?
No. Well, yes and no. It was the Methodist church, was the church that my family went to under the influence of my mother. She was a Methodist. I think my father grew up in a Baptist household out there in the country. But he didn't get baptized until he was nearly dead. I don't know how old he was, but it was in my adulthood or early adulthood that he finally became baptized. And I don't know how fervent he was. My mother was the organist and the pianist at the church. I was a lay preacher, but not on theology, really on, one of her mottos was, be good and you will be happy. And I gave motivational talks as a teenager. But I became a skeptic. And I've gotten comfortable with that. But when I was young, I was a college student, I began to doubt the whole business. I thought it couldn't possibly be true. A virgin birth, that's sure I didn't think that made much sense. And resurrection, I mean, that's a stretch. So, who do I talk to? I went back to the person in the town that was considered he who knew it all, and it was a doctor, Dr. Buster. So I went into his office and I said, Dr. Buster, I need to talk to you. Well, what about it, Jimmy? Well, I think I'm an atheist. Why, that is so sophomoric, Jimmy. Well, I shut up right then and left. And but that's my worldview. That's my now. I remember as a child, this trumpet playing, we had a trumpet trio. One real good player, it wasn't myself, and two toots. And we'd be called to play for funerals and blow taps. And there'd be a horn at the graveside, and then one over the hill and one over the hill. It was really a nice ceremony. And once we were in Berlin, in the cemetery in Berlin, where all the graves are east to west, except two. There's two over there from north to south. So I don't know how old I would have been. I wasn't 18. I was 15 or something. But that was curious, and I wanted to know why. So I started asking questions. And some local person said, oh, those folks, they're atheists, and they always lived crossways with the world. When they died, we buried them crossways with the world. Well, that feeling still exists there, I'm sure.
Are your parents buried there?
Yeah,
In Cheyenne?
and my wife and son.
In Cheyenne?
Yeah. My dad did not want to die. He didn't think he ever would die, I think. And he refused to take any actions to get ready for dying. So when he died, he didn't have a plot. It's a pretty big cemetery, and the plots didn't cost anything. Well, when that happened, my mother she was now in charge, and she had some money, and she was, by God, going to have plots. So she bought a parcel. So we've got places to be buried for several generations there now. And it's really nice. It's on the high point of a little hill there. And
Did you do any inscription on his that would go?
no, that wasn't his style.
That wasn't his style. Okay.
They, at my mother's insistence, they have on the back side of the stone, they kind of have the genealogy that they, LL and Arita were the father of and grandparents of. They have that. But Oklahoma's leader in upstream flood control is not there.
Or your mother being the conservation widow?
No, no. Or that she was a music teacher piano teacher for I don't know how many generations of kids. And they all thrived under her tutelage. It's just her son didn't. The only one that she really probably had a terrible problem with.
Well, had her parents been born and raised in that area?
Oh, at Hammond. They were from Hammond. Her father was the son of a man who came to Oklahoma building the railroads, building the fill, making the terrace to put the railroad track on. And why they settled in western Oklahoma, they were not from Oklahoma. I don't know where they were from, Kentucky. And he settled down and then started a store. Every place where one of these railroad things would go through, and they built a town. If you had a store there, you could make some nickels. And they did that. Then my grandfather was the son of the original one. He carried on with the store business. It was very, very thrifty. He saved his money like crazy. He had 7 kids. And his goal in life was to leave a farm for each one of these kids. So he was in his 60s when he got all that accomplished, and he wasn't going to live much longer. He had diabetes and he liked whiskey. And he knew that his life was coming to an end, so he, before his death, gave each one of these children a farm, including the minerals. He's dead, out of the picture. His widow lives many, many years after that. And the eldest brother of this clan sort of takes over the father figure. The oil boom pops up and the first oil lease happens. And at that moment, these children can see that, oh, well, now these farms are scattered. They're not connected. And they all have minerals on them. Now, it's time, and once the sister that got this first lease said, you know what's going to happen as time goes by, somebody's going to get rich and somebody else is going to be poor. And they said, we need to do something. And the elder brother, the oldest brother, said, we need to pool. What about if we pool our minerals regarding production? And if it's on me, you get a 7th and I get a 7th. But the leases, we'll take the leases and run, but the production will split. And they did it. Oh, over the years I've had, when they were really going hot out there, I don't know how many wells my mother had some connection to. I mean, 100, more maybe. But on her farm, none. She would have, and in other ways, she was the most well-to-do of those kids. So it was kind of ironic that Lorena was getting the money from the other kids and the banker's wife didn't ever have any production on her own land.
Hmm.
But that was a remarkable family event, I think.
So how many acres did your daddy end up having, including what your mother brought into the picture?
On minerals?
No acres, just minerals, just farmland.
She brought in 280
Okay.
bottom land protected from flooding on Sandstone Creek. He and she had put together 880 and 1,500. And then since his death, we've added a little bit. We've added 640 and 770.
Well, over 3,000.
Yeah.
And you still manage some of
Oh,
that?
no, not manage. My father believed in trying to make a profit out of his farm. He really worked on it. And one of the ways was buying stocker steers and running them on the wheat and selling them in the summer. And it's a high risk poker game to do that, because if the market breaks or if the wheat's not there, you're going to take it in the neck. He liked it, but he was financially secure. He could stand it. All these farmers that would be his partners, he sometimes had to pick them up under the armpits and help them. And when he died, our main farm partner's son was ready to come in the business. And the father, didn't want the son to have to go through this risk. Said, let's change. Let's change to cow-calf. My dad had been against cow-calf because that was the normal activity, and it led to overgrazing, overstocking and overgrazing. So when he bought these property, they were just ruined, and he spent all of his young years trying to do things to improve the grass and terrace and all that stuff. So I didn't exactly inherit his financial drive to want to make the farms really profitable, and I could see the point of the farmer father not wanting to risk a loss of $250,000 for his son. So we've switched to that operation, but with limited stocking. So our on the 3,000 acres, there's 90 cows, 45 on one place and 45 on the other place. But it doesn't make much money. And the agriculture side is not making any money at all.
How much cropland do you think you have in 3,000?
Well, the main thing is 600 acres of wheat land. And we've got, and there's 240 from my mother. That's mostly agriculture. So, but that's all that's really good for agriculture. But the wheat's not doing well. I don't know how many years it's been since we have had a good fall crop for grazing cattle. It almost never happens anymore. We're not wanting to graze it, but there's not any wheat for them to eat.
But that's still very interesting to me that you're very sensitive on overgrazing, limited stocking.
Well,
it's carried on for decades in your family now.
Yeah, well, and it's a selfish reason too. You graze it all off, and nothing there. There's no deer, wild pigs there either, and that's what I've liked, and it's really been wonderful.
But not everyone gets that.
No.
You've had that in grace.
Our farmer, this is not recorded, is it?
It is, but before you go to say that, wild pigs, you were saying there's some pros to having wild hogs on your place.
Well, if you like to hunt, there's a pro, because they're not restricted. They can be hunted all year long, and they're smart as heck, and it's not easy to get one. And then they have these gorgeous teeth that come out of the jaws. I'll show you. Show him. And while they can do damage, if you had potatoes or if you had corn, and Milo too a little bit, but especially corn or potatoes, goodbye. But we don't grow that. We grow wheat and they don't do much to wheat. And they can root a real hole, but they don't do much.
Do they affect your fences?
No, they normally don't affect the fences. I don't know how they get through them exactly. They can, a great big old hog can get through the smallest place you can imagine.
And don't cause holes that the cattle will trip and break.
No, that's what the prairie dogs are blamed to do. And when I was a child, there were prairie dog towns everywhere, and that's where each boy would learn to shoot a .22 rifle, would be over a prairie dog town. And I loved it. My dad would take me. We'd go stalking through these little dirt creeks, and you could peek up and see these little prairie dogs sticking their heads up and try to shoot one. Well, so that would have been in the 40s. And about that time, the farmer mentality, rancher mentality, which says, if there's any hole that my cow might stick its foot in and might break, we need to get rid of those things. So they poison them. The government did it for them. And that was wrong. That was not. I mean, they belong there.
So there's no longer any.
There's few. And I just can't say this on tape, I don't think.
Oh, why not? It's conservation in a sense. So.
Well, okay, I know, but maybe the people involved will hear it. My partner, the man my age, the farmer father, hates them, but they've settled on a 40 or 80 acre field that he's got kind of close to his house. And he doesn't know what to do with it. I guess the poisoning program's gone. Anyway, but they're alive there. I want to transplant them, some, over into the wild area. It's just old blow sand as far as the when there's a flat area between the hills. It's not, can't grow wheat there, but you could grow prairie dogs, and that's where they used to live. But there's a guy from my time, 1 year ahead of me in school, who owns a big ranch there now. He's become a liability lawyer, has made a ton of money, and has a great big spread. And he had the same notion. So he hired somebody to transplant some. Guess what happened? In the dead of night, someone came in there and poisoned them.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So they do that to me too if the word gets out. So we're trying to have a secret society to get this started.
No. Why would they just didn't want to get them established again?
Yeah, I mean, but see, it's a warped mentality.
Well, they were part of the ecosystem.
Sure, they were. So were the hare, what do we call it? Jackrabbits. And the early day people went out of their way to try to kill every jackrabbit they could. It's true that they do graze. A jackrabbit eats grass all the time, so if there's a whole bunch of them, they can eat a lot of wheat. It's true. But deer eat a lot of wheat, antelope. But the underlying mentality, if you're trying to make a living out on the desert like that, is you don't want to have any competition.
Do you see any jackrabbits out there now?
Yeah, but nothing like there were in the settlement days, and nothing like there were there in the 50s. My grandmother had some alfalfa fields over it's on Sandstone Creek. And by then there was no flooding anymore, so these alfalfa fields would really thrive. And in the autumn and winter, they'd be covered with jackrabbits at night. So it was activity of the teenage boys to go there in the pickup truck and try to shoot them in the headlights. And there were lots of them. There's nothing like that now, but you do see some jackrabbit time to time. we're also losing the quail. Nobody knows what's happening there. That's not so directly from us killing them, but they're disappearing. Prairie chickens are gone. Turkeys are back. Turkeys are strong. That was a big successful wildlife conservation thing. I don't know where they got the turkey seed from, the few turkeys, but they brought them in from somewhere and released them, and they've thrived. We've tried it with antelope. One of these farms in the family is very close to a landmark called the Antelope Hills.
Oh, yeah.
And it's wild, rough, rocky, sandy, brushy land. And once I was invited to go on a trip with a veterans association. I got in it just because the guy organizing it had been out to my farm hunting. I had to let him come hunting. Well, anyway, he invited me to go on this boondoggle. And it was an air flight from Oklahoma City to the Florida Keys. And it was to recruit money for veterans benefits things from wealthy businessmen. So there were a lot of, there was a roofing company in town. Then it had a Balkan name. I can't remember, but that owner, that old man, he was on this plane, and a lot of people were, including a wheeler dealer banker from from a southern Oklahoma town. And this wheeler dealer banker also was a big hunter, and he was politically active, and he got on the Oklahoma Wildlife Commission and did real good things. So we met on this boondoggle. A German American friend of mine who would come to the farm with me for years, we'd work on projects together. He said, "Jim, why don't you see if you can get the wildlife department to release some antelope? This is Antelope Hills, open territory." So I let him talk me into it, and maybe I even got him to write the letter and I'd sign it to the wildlife department. And sure enough, this banker was on that committee. He came out and had a look, and he said, "Well, yeah, we'll see what we can do." The next year, sure enough, the Oklahoma Wildlife Department traded wild turkeys for antelope to Wyoming, and the antelope came from a military installation up there. They had so many of them that they couldn't drive their planes or their tanks or something. They needed to get them off. And they loaded 44 of them up in the cattle cars and brought them to Oklahoma, and just happened to release them on our pasture. But they have not thrived. They weren't welcomed by the other landowners, that's one thing, including my partner. And that was so we don't talk about that. We've got a good relationship, but that's one of the black sides. Current politics, another black side. But they released them, and then some were collared, and they did keep track of them, but they didn't. There was no effort to protect them, not from humans, but protect them from predators. And when they have their little fawns, the fawn's protection is lack of scent. It's not mobile when it's tiny. They're little bitty creatures. But bobcats and coyotes can find them. And they've just decimated every crop of fawns. And finally this herd, which was 44, rapidly went down to about 30 and stayed in that area for a while.
How long ago was that?
It was 25 years ago.
Oh.
And, there were things the wildlife department could have done to make that more successful, but they didn't want to because the local farmers didn't want them to.
Are there any still out there?
7.
7 left.
And people like seeing them a little bit, but not enough. It's the same. It's the same mentality as on the hogs.
Yeah, I would think the same thing with the prairie dogs and antelope. I mean, from a tourist standpoint.
It is hard for them. It's hard for them to look beyond their horizon. I'm not saying that I can blame them. I mean, they have had a tough go through the years to exist now, but farmers are pretty well taken care of. I mean, there are people in Washington watching over some. I'll cuss. I hate dealing with the bureaucracy of anything, and in the agricultural world now, I mean, it's pretty big bureaucracy, lots of papers, lots of forms. And I'll cuss and get mad about it, but then a couple of times a year, here comes the check, and all of a sudden, well, that was pretty good. They're helping us.
Do you have any land in CRP or any of those?
No, not in CRP, but we have our own CRP, I guess you could say. I mean, we've got really good. In fact, it's a danger now. The grass is so lush in the summer months. Come these winter months, spring months, it's a fire hazard.
Were you impacted by the wildfires?
Almost just missed it by a hair. And of course, that was good for the grass, but it was terrible for the fences, the barns, and the combines are out there. And for me, it'd be deer stands.
Have you ever done any prescribed burns?
No, I kind of believe in it, but I'm afraid it'd get away and burn stuff I didn't want burned. And my farmer partner hasn't pushed it, so neither have I.
You'd mentioned Congressman Lucas a minute ago. Was your dad and his father, were they?
They were contemporaries. I'm guessing they weren't too palsy-walsy because of the political differences. I don't know that at all. Mr. Lucas ran a good, independent little business. And
In Cheyenne?
In Cheyenne, a lumberyard and construction material. And then a classmate of mine from those days, maybe a classmate of my brother's, went to work for him 100 years ago and eventually bought the business, and it's still a going enterprise. They moved the location.
But did he have land close to you all?
No, relatively close, but not joining or anything. More in the Crawford Roll area, the east of us. We're almost, our land, well, the bigger chunk of it's almost in Texas. Just a mile, just not very far from
Close to Rayton?
Yeah, due north of Rayton.
Okay.
And a mile to the east, or 2 miles. So, right. Good view of the Antelope Hills from the little house we had. There was this farmhouse that we've over the years converted to our getaway house was built in 1942 by the local farmer, Mr. Mustin, by his own hands. I mean, he built it. And it's out of tile that is clay, red clay tile. They're long and wide, but in height they're short. They have 3 air pockets that go through them. And it's good. It has a basement, it has a cellar, and I lived in it when I lived in the basement when I was the tractor jockey. That was a little bit interesting. In my tractor jockey days, we didn't own this farm where this house is. It's 360 or 340 acres. It was owned by Mr. Mustin. And Mr. Mustin farmed on a little Ford tractor. And here I'd come by in this big H, and we'd just be across the fence from each other and wave, hi, how you doing? He was an old man, I was 12 years old. One day, he stopped and he said, Jimmy, come here, I want to talk to you. I said, do you think your daddy would want to buy my farm? Well, I sure don't know, Mr. Mustin, but I'll ask him. And I did. And he did.
Huh.
And we got that house then, and so it was rented, and one of our prior, it was the cousin of your friend, cousin of Baker Eads. He and his bride lived in it at first, and that's when I lived in the cellar. And then when my family would come back with 2 little kids, my wife and 2 little kids, to visit my parents, we would stay at their home in Cheyenne, which was a nice house and had a guest bedroom and everything, but you can easily get too many women under one roof. And that's what the situation was. So my wife would complain to me that my mother wasn't treating her nice, and I bet she wasn't. And so when I was fishing around for where to go for my medical practice, and after I got this offer to go back to North Carolina, it came up in conversation some way. My dad may have asked me, well, what could we do to make your stay better? I said, well, you could fix up that farmhouse, and then we'll just stay there when we come to visit, and the women won't have to be in each other's hair. So he did that while we were away in the Army. And then once we came back, we've just been working on it ever since, from 74 until now.
It's your getaway home, huh?
Yeah. All my doctor friends wanted to go to Colorado. They wanted to get a cabin on the river in Colorado. And I said to myself, well, how many hours is it going to take to get up there and back? And how many times a year are you going to go? And so to this farmhouse, it's not anything like Colorado, but it's 2.5 hours away, and I can go a lot. Or that was one of the few good decisions ever made in my life, I think, on planning.
And it has indoor plumbing.
It has indoor plumbing, but a wood cook stove. Yeah, and that was my deal. My deceased son and I went on a hunt together once in Colorado, and we were in a shack cabin, but it had a wood cook stove. And I had such a wonderful experience there with him. And I kept saying it at my work, gosh, I wish I had a wood cook stove. Gosh, I would have a wood cook stove. And my nurse heard all this. And one day she brought me a New Yorker magazine. And in the advertisement section, in the back of the New Yorker magazine, there was an advertisement for newly manufactured wood cook stoves. They're made in Canada. And the brand is called Sweetheart. So I got one. I didn't tell anybody. I got one. I got the local guy to install it and put the chimney in and do all of that. And then I broke the news to my wife, and she was not happy. Her mother had slaved over those kind of stoves back in Denmark, and she didn't like it. But I love it. And in the cold weather, it heats the entire house. It smells good. It cooks good. It's got chrome on it, black iron and chrome. It's just the prettiest thing. Yeah, so that's my baby.
That's neat.
Cast iron pots and cookware, and
Sounds like you have a nice getaway.
it is a nice getaway. No TV. I have a stereo. I do have a TV player. You can watch movies, but you can't watch TV. There's no good reception out there anyway.
Just go outside and watch the wildlife.
You can do that, or I have a fireplace. You can build a fire and just mellow out. And
How often do you get out there?
I go a couple of times a month. When I was working, I only went once a month. We had a business meeting there once a month in Cheyenne, and then I'd stay at the cabin. But now I go more often. And I love going, and my dogs like to go, And then these pigs, well, because they're there, it's everything's different. And the deal is the 4 or 5 days of the month before the moon turns full. Once it turns full, it rises so late in the night that you have to spend the entire night out there sitting around trying to find the pigs. But the week before it's full, it's still very bright. It's maybe a quarter or something. It's not full, half maybe, but it still gives enough light that you can see. And so that's where I like to go.
What do you do with them once you?
Well, if it's not a big boar, we eat it. And that's what's wrong with us in our management of this. It's a pest, it's a threat all through America now. This animal was brought over by Hernando Cortez. It's the Iberian Black Pig. That's what came with him on the boat. And all these hundreds of years now, they've spread all over America, and they've interbred with tame pigs, with domestic pigs. But the main thing is the black Iberian hog. They're famous for their wonderful hams. That's where the Jabon Iberica comes from. Finest of the finest. And we say, oh, you can't eat them. And that's the same mentality at work. But the boars smell pretty bad. And they're so big that one human being can't manage the thing. They're as big as a calf. 300 pounds. But the smaller ones, 100 pounders and 200 pounders, it's wonderful, wonderful meat.
You dress them out there then?
Yeah. And I crock pot. You can't go wrong with the crock pot. And no one's ever said they didn't like it. I've had a lot of. But we as a people, we as a nation, don't view these tons and tons and tons of meat that's available there as beneficial in any way. And we're doing things that are immoral in a way. I'm not a believer, but we're all we mammals are all really pretty close to each other. So it just does not seem right to fly around in a helicopter and kill these things and leave them lie. That's like the buffalo hunters for the tongues or for the robes. It's just sick. But that's where we are right now. And I've had a recent episode. A guy from out there called me and said, Jim, we got to do something about these pigs. I said, what do you mean? Well, they're coming down into Strong City. Well, Strong City is just a few houses now, but it's still and I don't doubt that they're right. They're smart. They'll go wherever there's something to eat, garbage and stuff like that. He said, yeah, and we get to chase them, and they seem to kind of go back up on your place. We know a man with real good pig dogs, and we want to have a great big pig hunt. And we want to pursue them, of course, across our fence line. Well, I'm not really totally against that if there were just one iota of using what you were going to bag, what you were going to kill. And there isn't. This is coyote hunting territory. Have you ever been on a coyote hunt? Well, you drive around with a pickup full of greyhounds. They're in boxes and they're sticking their heads out. They can see. And the most sophisticated way of doing it is somebody flies around in an airplane, in a little tiny airplane with a walkie-talkie, and says, okay, I've got a coyote spotted here and here and here. You rush there and you pick up and let your dogs out, and the chase is on. And this whole mob of dogs are chasing one coyote. And they don't just tree it where the hunter goes up like they do lions. The hunter goes up and shoots it. they rip it apart. It's the most grotesque thing you've ever watched. Well, that's all in play, and I can't very well say no to this guy. I mean, I have business interests there too. They're funny folks, these country folks. So, but I do say no on helicopter. I'm not ever going to agree to letting a helicopter come over and shoot them. The trouble is, the real hunter can't get very many. So let's say if you got one a night for 5 nights every month, that'd still only be a handful of pigs, and they reproduce like they're explosive. The sow has 2 litters at least a year, maybe more, and she has 6 or 8 or 10 or 12, and they're so smart.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
But if you ever have a chance to put in a word for, well, let's find a way to sell this meat. Let's find a way to use it in the prisons or use it in I mean, there's plenty of people that are hungry it's good meat. Has to be cooked done. It's true. But otherwise, it's just like chicken.
Need to put a fancy title to it.
Right. Well, calling it wild boar is better than calling it feral hog.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
that's a negative.
Interesting.
And,
you know, with all the watershed dams and with all the efforts like what you and your father had done to improve the area out there, how many or what percent of the local farmers out there do you think really understand the benefits of the watershed program, the dams, and the flooding the way it used to be back then?
I doubt there's any left that really understand that flooding angle. I mean, they didn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't say that for sure. It's not a hot topic in the coffee shops anymore. I know that. You don't ever hear about talking about that. It makes your property for recreational purposes extremely valuable. There's one on Dead Indian that's on the Chalfant family. Chalfant family's a big, long, been there forever kind of family, and they have a pretty good sized farm, a ranch, no farming land, and they have a really good site on them that holds water and big, and the geese are there and the ducks are there and the fishing's good. So if you have one like that, boy, that increases the value of your property.
For hunting leases or just?
Well, yeah, I would. I don't think they lease there. Kind of like we are. Family's big and the family likes to hunt.
Do they use only for water for oil field work?
They did that. They sold it until it was dry.
Mm-hmm.
But it still functioned as flood prevention.
Correct.
But its other aspects were lost. And this one that is on my dad's property, it functions in its flood role, but everything else is
Drains out.
yeah.
I think that's part of the failure of the education program. You know, really, how should those people know what the flooding was without having some type of a continual education program?
Right.
We've really fallen short in that area.
Yeah.
For people to really.
And the memory's short. I mean, human memory's short. My quality time with my dad was pretty rare because he was a workaholic. He worked himself and he kept his business open 6 days a week, and on Sunday it was time for 9 holes of golf, which he and my mom fought over. So first thing impact upon me was I decided golf is a bad sport for any married man, and I refused to play. He tried to teach me, and I don't want any of this because it was just so successful in the family. The second thing was that year that I was the chief resident and was back in Oklahoma, he'd go with me duck hunting, and we'd go out on those things, had some great times. We didn't have any proper clothes and it's cold, but we had a good time together, and I loved it.
Did he do a lot of hunting? Or
No, he was a quail hunter in the Depression. Not much to do in the bank in the Depression. Nobody had money, so there was a lot of free time. And the local people, there was a lot of quail, and local people would go quail hunting. He was a very good shot. But I didn't get to go with him. The only time I could go with him was on weekends or on Thanksgiving or on Christmas or on New Year's. The bank was closed on those days. Well, only New Year's was possible because of my mother and her. She had a close tie to her family and wanted us all to be in on that. Now, I can understand that, but I didn't like it. I wanted to go.
You want to go hunting?
And my dad didn't much like that family stuff too much, and I picked that up from him. But mostly I wanted to be with him, and I wanted to go hunting, and we didn't get to do it too.
But that's some of your better memories of your dad.
Yeah.
That's a good story.
Yeah. I got I don't have it now, but I got his shotgun, and I like shooting, and I learned to shoot with it, really. He bought me a 410 gauge bolt action shotgun. Not the thing you want to give a boy if you want him to hit a quail, because it was full choke and didn't shoot many pellets. He shot a 16 gauge. Well, that has a lot more pellets. So I remember the first quail, he was along the first time I shot a quail, and he didn't see it fall. Cubby gets up, boom, he gets a bird. Well, I boomed too, but he didn't see my bird go down. He's picked this up and said, "Let's go." No, wait, Daddy, I got one over here. We didn't use the dog. We just were our own bird dogs. We found the quail. And I imagined that I looked better in his eyes when I hit it.
Nice.
But I finally got him to get me another shotgun.
Good memory.
Yeah, I had a wonderful childhood, and our parents liked this family thing they did with their oil minerals. Things like that percolated around in our family. And when I wanted to go to Vienna, when I got to college in Weatherford, I took a class in German. I don't know why exactly. But I did, and the fuddy-duddy German guy who was the teacher had got his PhD in Mexico and married a Mexican woman when he was there, and now was in Weatherford as the professor. And so the first thing that came up was he said, "James, would you be interested to spend would you like to go to summer school in Mexico?" I was a freshman that year. Well, yeah, it sounds pretty good to me. So here I go home to my folks and say, I've got this arrangement. I can go to summer school in Mexico. And my professor says it'd be a good thing to do. And all we got to do is I just have to fly down there and go to this town and enroll. And then at the end, you can come and get me. Lo and behold, my folks said, okay. And that's exactly what I did. I got on the plane in Oklahoma City, and I flew to Dallas, I guess, then a plane to Mexico City. I didn't speak a word of Spanish. I was 18 and a half years old, maybe 19. Get off this plane. Even the smells are different in a foreign country. When you first go, it's just overwhelming. I didn't, how am I going to get to my hotel? I did have it written down, so I would get a taxi and get to the hotel. Next day, I have to catch a bus from Mexico City to Toluca, which is way, way, way up in the mountains, like mile high, like Denver, above Mexico City. Well, I'll get that done. I ride this bus. It's full of peasants and chickens and goats and stuff. We go up the mountain. Here come bicyclers on pedal bikes, like in the French race, the Tour de France. Here they go up the mountain, and there's 20 or 30 of them. God, I can't believe, what is that? Fields and fields of the agave cactus that they make for tequila, It was really special. I get there, and everything's okay, and it was totally safe. Wasn't a dangerous area in Mexico at all then. And the air in this high mountain city was pristine. Everything was wonderful. When I graduated from medical school, my wife and I went back. I wasn't married when I was there. I told her about this wonderful place in Mexico. They love us. They love Americans. And the food's good, and this is wonderful. And we go, and by then it's polluted. The air is black. Can't breathe. The whole Mexico City basin is just one bag of pollution. We get the turistas really bad. Can't get out of there fast enough.
What was it like up on the mountain up there?
Oh, it's just awful.
Terrible there too.
It's just awful.
What was the period of time from the time you were
8 years, I think.
Just 8 years? I
Yeah.
Oh.
It showed you what we can do when we would put our internal combustion engines to work.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And that's our next dilemma coming to Western Oklahoma is the climate impact and the need to find another energy source for the oil and gas. And the oil and gas has brought prosperity to people who before lived in poverty, and that's not going to go over well. So I don't know.
Do you have any wind farms in the area out there?
Yeah, really quite a few.
How are they received?
There's one big one south of Cheyenne, and there's one by Hammond, and there are several. None is quite as big as the one by Weatherford.
Mm-hmm.
I think that could be the largest out in the western part of the state, but there are still several.
How are they received by the locals?
I don't think I can really answer that. I don't know anybody from Weatherford. The naysayers say they make noise. Well, I don't know if they can make all that much, no much more than wind makes.
Impact the prairie chickens. There's debate on that too.
Yeah, but they were gone already.
Yeah.
Our property had prairie chicken. Yeah, up until recently. And there are not any wind farms on any of our property. There's plenty of space up there. And now there's grass, but for a long time there wasn't much grass. And I no wildlife biologist, but I think it was habitat destruction, the loss of the grass, and then the effect of livestock tromping over there all the time. But even on our property now, it looks like wonderful prairie chicken habitat, and there is grass, but there's not any prairie chicken.
So when you move in the prairie dogs, bring in the prairie chicken too.
Along with the antelope. Well, with all of these stories that you've shared about your dad and all the happenings out there, does your family have an understanding of his impact?
No, probably not as deeply as you do. I mean, because it was to us, it was sort of, well, Daddy's gone on a tour, or a lecture tour. I think my mother had insight into it. And in lots of ways, she was a big propagandist for him. But in this area, I don't believe she hammered into it quite as much.
Before the Sergeant Major celebration in 2000, a friend of mine was a public affairs specialist. We went out and interviewed your mother, and in the 90s, and she was quite a lady, very interesting.
She was still pretty spry then. She'd have been 80 or something.
Yeah, she was very much so. But she related some of these stories, or she got it in terms of the importance. But I wonder in terms of the kids in your family and brother's family and all, have you shared these stories with them to understand the importance of?
Well, that's a good point. No, I don't think so. More with my son and with my brother, I think, over time to some degree. But we're not too much to blowing our own horn.
But with your son being out there with the bank and all.
Yeah,
that,
no,
too,
no, yeah.
Could understand the importance in that area. And I wonder if they do understand that. Do they understand it from a local standpoint or a national standpoint?
I think the change that, I think if we were having this conversation 30 years ago, there would be, we would value his activities at a higher plane than we do now, and the difference is the oil money. That everybody pretty much has got an oil well or two, and it's totally changed the life style and life attitudes. I don't know if that's true, but that's my.
I can see where that have a bigger impact short term on their memories than the flooding of the 40s, 30s, and 40s.
Right.
Interesting.
Well, that cycles back around when the oil dries up, then.
I'm afraid so too. But the at the time of the flooding, there were all of these people that lived there in that county. There's 30,000 people. Well, 30,000, even if they didn't buy very much, that was enough to keep an urban economy of some kind going. Now, 5,000 people. And internet and Elk City or Walmart, and the towns are just dying. That there's not enough people to shop there, and it's gruesome.
You kind of wonder, looking ahead 10, 20 years, what that area is going to be like. Community.
And the schools are jealous of each other. This great big county, I don't know how many schools it had early on, lots and lots, but they were just one room for everything schools. But as the districts were formed, there was Hammond, there was Cheyenne, there was Strong City, there's Radin, there's Sweetwater, and none of these communities are now big enough to have enough students or enough money for a faculty to do a good high school. Instead of coming together, they drew apart because each district was getting the tax benefit from this production tax. So Sweetwater, I think, Sweetwater has a graduating class of just less than 10. Something like that. Then they built a new school. Then it gets blown away. In a tornado, they build it again. And they've stayed isolated. So it's
A little bit of politics.
a lot of politics. We all became Republicans when Lucas ran for Congress the first time. He was liked. He's from a good family. He's a good guy, but the whole region out there was Democrats, and he was on the Republican. So, out of goodwill for him, many people changed their registration to Republican just so they could vote for him. And it's they never changed back either. But the main thing, and my mother did it too. I think she may have changed back, but she changed and voted for a Republican. He's been there long enough to retire. He's been there a long time.
I wonder.
While his wife runs the ranch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always enjoy his Linda stories all the time.
She's a strong person.
She is.
And he's a good guy.
Yeah, I like it.
Good. Still on?
We could wrap up if you want.
Huh?
Anything else
Yeah,
you want to know, Larry?
I don't know, did your family have photos of your dad any photos while they were at these meetings, or out around the dams?
Not all the photos like that were made by the governmental people, and there are copies of stuff like that in this stuff, but we don't.
You don't have a lot of family pictures of him just out around the dams, whatever.
I have one with him on a duck hunt up in my office. I'd be happy to show it to you.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't seen too many other than like the sign and.
You'll never see him smile on a photograph, except I think he is in this one.
Is that your mother?
That's my mother.
That's your mother.
And look at my mother's tummy.
I noticed that.
In this big old beer belly. And that's what everybody thought. And she was a teetotaler of the first order. Well, I was off at Duke, and I get a call from the doctor, and they say, well, your mom came in and she's got a huge pelvic tumor, ovarian tumor. Well, they're usually cancerous, but hers wasn't. It was as big as a basketball.
Oh.
That's what that is, sticking out through her coat.
Oh my gosh.
And she, of course, didn't want to go to the gynecologist. Ladies don't want to do that. She was raised to call a bull a gentleman cow. What her mother told her.
Did your dad have any pictures with the president? Eisenhower?
I think I've seen one of a plane, president and dad in a close area, but I don't have it.
Interesting. We were trying to capture a lot of those historic pictures and get them on a website.
Gosh, I'm glad you're putting so much energy into this. It's wonderful.
Well, it's important, dude. It's going to be all lost here in a short time.
Right.
If we don't capture that.
Right.
And you've done a big service here by sharing those stories, to pass those on and have.
Well, let's go look at that picture.
Okay,
Did you?
let me say thank you. Thank you for doing this.
You're very, very
It's
welcome.
been a pleasure.
I've enjoyed it.